Well, thank you, Hannes, for inviting me. And I'm really amazed by the success of RecSys. I know it was a serious conference. Now it is serious and big. And as it is so serious, I think that the best way to start the conference is with a joke. And of course, a Jewish joke. And I hope you will appreciate the connection later on with my talk. Anyway, there is a rabbi that dies, and so in heaven, in line, there is the Archangel Gabriel who's taking care of the newcomers, and in line before him there is someone tattooed with a big golden chain, and so a big guy. And so it's his turn, and Archangel Gabriel says, okay, name, profession. The guy says a name, whatever, Amos Shapira. I was a taxi driver in Brooklyn. So Archangel Gabriel checks. They don't have computers there, so he checks on the list they have. Found him. Okay, very good. So a silk robe for you and a golden staff. And welcome to paradise. Next one. So it's the turn of the rabbi. He says his name, whatever. David Rosenfeld. I was chief rabbi in the Bet Yaakov congregation for 20 years. Wait a moment, says Archangel Gabriel, let me check. Yes, right, you are here on the list. Okay, a cotton robe and whatever, a wooden cane, and just move in, please, fast. And the rabbi says, wait a moment. Throughout my whole life, I did so many important things, and I was studying the sacred books so deeply, and I had this big congregation. How come that the taxi driver got such a good treatment and I'm treated this way? And Archangel Gabriel says, look, here we look at results. When you were delivering your sermons, everybody was sleeping. When the taxi driver was driving, everybody was praying. Okay, so this talk is about persuasion. It's mainly concerned with some experiences in research in automated persuasion. And of course, we don't mean this kind of persuasion. We mean more substantial induction through influencing the behavior of other people, or the beliefs, or the attitudes of other people through communication. If we think about it, all language, as philosophers of language have shown us, is in a way persuasion, is influencing other people, trying to achieve a different state of the world by intervening linguistically on other people. And language has been with us for a long time. It's part of human nature, so we are essentially persuasive people. The study of persuasion, of course, linked also with the study of rhetorics, for instance, has also a very long tradition, for instance, since the time of Aristotle. But emphasis has been, for probably 2 millennia, if not more, on argumentation. And argumentation is just one aspect of persuasion. By the way, argumentation is also the aspect that was mainly studied in artificial intelligence for probably some 40 or 50 years. But there is not only argumentation. For instance, Petty and Cacioppo have proposed that there are two routes to persuasion. One, in fact, is the central route based on logics and argumentation. Another is what they call a peripheral route, where the important concepts are the status of the communication source, its attractiveness, credibility, and in a way, it's what is at the basis also of much of advertisement nowadays. I think that just a little part of advertisement is based on argumentation. Mostly is evocative or anyway making the message achieve the result through some other means than the direct logical process. If we talk about intelligent interfaces, we have to note that more and more intelligent systems have their own intention and their goals to pursue, and they participate to a social setting. And it's easy to predict that there will be really a kind of interface that will exploit the social setting, and they will achieve their own goals by intervening on people. Which, of course, raises some ethical problem. I will come back to that later. So, in general, the loop is for an intelligent system to persuade the target is to assess the context, engage people, persuade them, and then assess the impact. I should say also that this field, so of course is quite initial, owes a tribute to the larger field of cognitive studies, in particular as far as attention, memorization, engagement, affect, social relations are concerned. And as I think is clear to all of us, it is somehow connected with creative processes. If we look at advertisements, I think that nowadays many advertisements, probably the large majority, they say in England, in the UK, 90% of advertisements have some form of humor in them, and a typical creative process. And there can be other aspects of creativity in human production of ads, and therefore, as we talk about flexible and adaptive systems, computational creativity on the part of a system, is also a very relevant field for persuasion. just a look to the potential for advertising. Of course, these are standard remarks that could be made. Reduction in time to market and extension of possible occasions for advertisement are there with the current computational infrastructure. Overall reduction of off-target messages, eliminating the less relevant for the individual in a given situation, not really present now, but certainly this becomes a possibility for the future, totally new. Attention to wearing out of message and to need for planning variants and connected messages across time and space. So if you want an advertisement campaign, personalized this time. Contextual personalization on the basis of audience profile, dynamic model, and situational information, starting, but of course there will be much more in the future. Interactivity, of course, and monitoring audience reaction and feedback. So there is an enormous potential for targeting individuals, for instance, targeting different situations, and adapting in a creative manner persuasive messages. In the following, I will refer to a sizable project that we had at my institute, and that I had the pleasure of directing. It's called PERTE, and it includes also something in addition to this, but say that these are three important areas, the three main areas actually. Natural language-based persuasion, and we focused on persuasion based on short text, creative production, or variation. Defense from inappropriate persuasion, so how to detect that a message or a text are trying to persuade you in an inappropriate way. Behavior-based persuasion, in particular for small groups. And we did some initial work on computational ethics. So I will briefly refer to some of the sub-projects in this area in the following. Start with persuasive language. In particular, an area that we have devoted quite a bit of attention is variations of short texts. So, this is an advertisement, actually. It's about this juicy smoothies brand called Innocent. And you can read this text. Okay, this is a very essential text that refers to some facts. And now I change this text by introducing a few mostly adjectives that make the text more attractive. I mean, the concept that is proposed with this text more attractive. I could change it slightly more and make it even more attractive. Okay, there was some change in the text. The basic semantics is there, but of course it's made much more positive, attractive, catchy, And actually, it was not the truth when I said this, with 2 slides ago, when I said this is an advertisement of Innocent. The real advertisement is this one, the latter one. Just for fun, one could change it and make it negative with the same concept, the same sentences, making it negative. In this case, probably it's better also to change the name of the brand. Okay, so we're dealing with automatic sentiment-based text variation. Valentino is a system for changing the affective balance of a message. Given a text and a certain slanting coefficient, it produces a new message with a different, more positive or more negative balance, but minimizing changes in meaning and wording. For instance, you should try our dishes is the starting sentence. And it can become, you should, in this case, with just insert one adjective, you should try our good dishes, or better, you should try our delicious dishes, or in negative, our tasteless dishes. So, Valentina is meant to be used as part of a complex system that needs to deliver specialized output to different users. For instance, in a museum, we started with something connected with cultural heritage domain. The same kind of text could be balanced more or less depending on the age of the visitor. Say that it's talking about dinosaurs. These animals were living on the earth 230 million of years ago, or can become these majestic animals were inhabiting the earth 230 million of years ago, or these incredible dinosaurs were roaming off the earth 230 million of years ago. But of course, it is easy to think about other application, especially in advertisement domain, but also for social issues. Now, why are we targeting minimal variations? Not a total rephrase or a total expression, a total new expression coming from the internal semantic meaning of the original sentences or text. Minimal variations tend to have aesthetic properties. And according to the optimal innovation hypothesis, they can be more pleasurable and catchy, of course, and also memorizable than an entirely new text. We all know this slogan that was quite successful. Now, just for the sake of making some fun of this, let us think that we want to come out with a new slogan. Okay. A much better slogan than this is this one. So, this is because of the optimal innovation concept. So, how do we do that? We start from the input text. Our analysis includes morphology, syntax, and rhetorics. Modification is based on high-level and low-level rules and produces the slightly modified text. Analysis is based, produces structure in constituents and dependencies. Coreferences are important, and so are rhetorical relations. For instance, the dish was good, but I didn't like it, can become something very different with a very slight change in order. Let's see. The high-level rules are based on a planning system. They take the analysis results and compare it with a set of handwritten rules, then decides which ones to apply to each of to reach the target score. When I say high-level rules and low-level rules, high-level rules are really handwritten rules that are based on some strategies, mainly concerned with the rhetorics. Low-level rules are really based on corpus-based techniques and learned from the available corpuses. So for the high-level rules, the example can be this: the food is delicious, but the restaurant is a bit pricey, which has a slightly positive sentiment. Or the restaurant is a bit pricey, but the food is delicious. So in this case, the words are exactly the same, but with this restructuring of the words, of this change of order among the two clauses that compose it, it changes completely, much more positive. The low-level rules are based on a query system that links Google Ngrams, WordNet, LSA similarity, a resource called SentiWordNet, and other resources of information. So we have a system that really takes out the experience from a large, very, very large corpus, like Google Ngrams, and integrates other kind of resources so that the proposed expressions are, in the end, expressions that are successful, that have a high likelihood of being successful because they were used in the past. Simple case, a good dish. Candidates for passing from good to something more convincing are a set of adjectives. Delicious and exquisite are chosen because they are appropriate for being connected to the word dish, while the other ones in this list are not. Healthy could be, perhaps. And delicious is chosen because it is of the right level and it is a better choice in this case. We have also a way for evaluating the persuasive impact by exploiting Google AdWords. So differently from the use of crowdsourcing for many studies in language processing, in this case, what we want to see is the real persuasive impact of this slight modification. And so we want to observe a change in the behavior of the target. AdWords can accommodate such things, so we adapted it for our goals. And the experiment is simply, we have a control condition that is the original message, an experimental condition that is a slanted message, and then the click-through rate is used to determine which message was more persuasive. And we have, in these experiments, we had some positive results that show that what Valentina is doing seems to be effective. Potentially, this can be used as a basis for an adaptive system that provides advertisement for different specific targets. For instance, we have this restaurant that wants to say, try our exquisite dishes, the best restaurant in town. And if the target is a male, 17 years old, high school student, it could say the coolest restaurant in town, if you have the appropriate resources about teenagers' language. Or in this case, you would say something, the charming restaurant in town. But of course, you can have other aspects of adaptivity. In sum, Valentina is a system for generating different versions of short text. It is meant to be used as part of a complex system that needs to deliver specialized output to different users, with applications for advertising, news headlines, behavior change support systems, influencing social attitudes for the good, part of a message answering system, and so on. And now, a creative system that we developed based on Valentina called Subvertizer. So this is a system basically for making fun of advertisements, to defend yourself from advertisement. So you go around with your smartphone and say that you encounter this poster, advertising poster. The system modifies the poster, of course, virtually on your smartphone. So you take a picture. The system selects the text region on the picture. It then calls an OCR system, character recognition, which should be checked because they are not so good, but just in case, it checks. And if it is not perfect, you adapt it. And then it chooses a new message. And it produces it on the picture. With the idea of making fun of the original message. With the same format and characters. So, it's just an exercise for making fun of existing advertisement based on Valentino. Of course, differently from the basic Valentino, here there is also a component that looks for this ironic effect. So that chooses adjectives in particular that are in an ironic relation with the context. Now, still another work based on adapting linguistic expression to the news. So, especially some not first-rate newspapers may have some exceptionally good creative persons that deal with providing a catchy title to the news. The Daily Mirror, for instance, there was this, naming Private Ryan, that of course is catchy because it refers to the well-known movie. And I think that the fact was that this football player, Ryan Giggs, was named in the House of Lords in some context, and I don't know the exact story, but something that had to do with the Ryan Giggs. So, a slight variation of a very familiar expression, the name of this movie in this case. And it's full of things that are of this sort. It's really an arena of creativeness. Okay. Now, we developed a system that does this automatically. So how does the system work? It finds ingredients, we look at today's news from BBC, and it extracts from the news the main ingredients. So there is a process by which first stop words and then other words that are not enough specific are taken out, and what remains is a set of very characteristic words for this particular news. It has a bag of familiar expressions that are proverbs, movie titles, songs, song titles, and so on. So it checks over those and looks for those that are closer to the ingredients that were found before. So they are. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, thank you. So 3, in this case, appear to be more relevant for the system. Not clear why the third one, anyway. And now the given expression is replaced with a variation and with other variations. They are reordered because of relevance. And finally, they are ranked. The basis of similarity, the dependency closeness, and then a final rank is given. So the first position is make a run for the governor. And this is proposed as a title, a catchy title for that particular text. So the system is based on incoming news. The selection of keywords in the news. WordNet, you know, Freebase is a resource of facts and information about famous people and things. There is this resource of well-known expressions. And in the end, headline and expression are paired based on similarity, and the expression is modified taking into account dependency statistics. Examples. I want to read them, you can see them here. It's interesting for me, the last but one case, in which the system comes out with something that is really not catchy, because of course when the make love not war expression was proposed in the 60s, it was already a change on the make peace not war. And so the system cannot know this and and comes back to the original expression. So we have developed a system that utilizes various NLP techniques to innovate existing well-known expressions by bringing in a new concept coming from evolving news. And evaluation confirms the effectiveness of the approach for evoking novel concepts. We have done crowdsourcing experiments about that confirm this. And we believe also that it shows that effectiveness is correlated with aesthetic pleasure involved in appreciation of the modification. Okay, this was it for what I wanted to show to you about language processing, and I will say now something briefly about influencing a small group's behavior, quite different area of our work. In this case, our prototype is aimed at supporting group conversation with automatically targeted directives. The situation is one of a brainstorming meeting. We know that group creativity and teamwork are considered very important in our organization, and they have been studied at length, for instance, by Paulus and others. And there are many works that are concerned with how to improve brainstorming. And also technological support has been proposed so far, but of different kinds. Normally, if a facilitator is proposed, the facilitator has a very explicit part in the meeting. One other thing that has to be said is that balanced group participation is considered a very important factor to foster the creative process of building of one another's ideas. So even before understanding if a brainstorming session has produced good ideas, it is considered a very promising precondition if all people participated with their ideas. So, if the social setting is not one where there is just one authority that speaks and the other that listen. Various studies, for instance, I think that the most well-known one is the one by D'Amico and colleagues, in which there was the adoption of sensors to understand what's going on. And what happened is that to participants, it was proposed basically a concise view of who was speaking mostly. So this information would require a reflective act, a reflection on the part of the individual participants, who then would decide to change behavior. For instance, the one that speaks too much says, okay, I have spoken too much, now let's hear somebody else. So it requires this reflection. Our view is different. We wanted to change behavior in a subtle way. So the reference approach is the one of the nudge theory. Nudge theory has been mainly discussed within decision-making and behavioral economics research. Suggests that positive reinforcement of behavior conveyed through subtle suggestions and hints can influence the motivation, collaboration, and decision processes, even in a subconscious manner. So this is the framework for our approach, and the design concepts have been a side of the adoption of persuasive technologies to base the approach on peripheral displays that are not intended as the primary focus of participants' activity, calm technology, so that we don't so that the system intervenes in an unobtrusive manner, and again, presenting information in a pleasant manner. So we have designed a conversation table that is socially aware and that supports equal participation in a small group discussion. It must continuously estimate the engagement during a small group conversation and explore the effect of subtle and to compare it of subtle messages, and in our study, as compared with the overt messages. So this is the setting. The system tracks nonverbal behavior displayed during a group conversation, and it influences and nudges equal participation through targeted directives. As you see, the system is based on this table that has 5 displays. We even had a version with even more displays that made for a round thing with a semisphere with several small displays, but then we adopted this system with just 5 displays. There are then 4 Kinect sensors that track participant head orientation. Gaze direction are measured in real time, tracking who is looking at whom. And the system estimates the degree to which each member is evenly looked at. As I said, the goal of the system is to produce a balanced participation, but before the balanced participation, the system has to observe where the gazes go and to understand a bit of the dynamics of expectation for the intervention of others. So the system measures the relative amount of visual attention received by the other participants in a given time interval. And when the index falls below a defined threshold, the system enacts a visual intervention. So in a neutral state, there is no action on the part of the system that influences people. But when the system detects inequality in participation, the group member with low participation is selected as the target of the communication. And as I said, we wanted very unobtrusive and calm technology for achieving these directives. And for instance, this is one experimentation that we've done with bubbles that basically move from the participants that are more active in the conversation toward the under-participant display. And this is contrasted with overt visual intervention, in which normal textual directives are used, still contextual. I mean, system detects the state of the conversation, how people behave, but it intervenes, in this case, with explicit overt directives. So there is, in our implementation of this, there is an arrow, and there are specific messages. The person on your left wants to say something. So in the evaluation of this technology, we compared in reality 3 cases: the overt case, the subtle case, and a subtle case with a hint at the beginning of the session in which it was explained that there would be these bubbles and they would, in general, mean something. Our hypothesis was that the subtle condition will perform as well as the overt condition, but to the advantage of the subtle strategy, it would be considered less invasive than the overt one. Of course, not to be invasive is very important in a brainstorming session where you want people to be totally concentrated on the discussion. Okay, this is the overt directives. And the results were interesting indeed, especially for the case where we presented subtle messages with this initial explanation before getting to the system. They are comparable, in this case, to the overt messages. Okay, then there are results concerned with a specific individual gaze movement toward the target after the intervention as compared with before the intervention, with reason of intervals of 5 seconds, and also this case confirms the effectiveness of the subtle messages. And of course, this makes sense only, again, if the system is appreciated as to be less invasive than the overt messages one. And in fact, I think that we had good results with part of the participants. And in particular, we studied also the correlation with personality. Participants with low extroversion score are okay with an overt system, even if then perhaps it distracts them more. Participants with low score on consciousness trait consider the subtle version as more influencing. Okay, so I hope I have some time still. 8 minutes I have for talking about a very, very important aspect, ethical issues. When you speak about systems that persuade people, not through argumentation, people are very worried. And so we thought that it is time to start with some work concerned with the moral acceptability of persuasive systems. Autonomous agents are able to decide suitable courses of action for achieving their goals. They, more and more, will have to discern between good and bad. And we need to focus our attention on ethical acceptability of machine choices. So, system will have to be endowed by the capability of reasoning about choices that are acceptable for people. It's not just a matter of designing systems that in one way or the other, it's a matter of systems to be able to decide what means are morally acceptable for influencing the behavior of other people. And as I said, this appears as one of the ultimate criteria for their acceptability, in particular in the case of intelligent interfaces. The methodology that we have adopted is based on behavioral studies, so leveraging on the tradition of so-called natural ethics and the moral dilemma approach. We focus on adaptive, persuasive technology systems aiming to increase the effectiveness of attitude or behavior changes by adjusting their communication to the preferences and so on of their persuadee. And now, if we talk about autonomous systems, the few studies that have been done about moral choices are concerned, of course, with the action that a system is performing, normally in the real world, if in the case of robots. But in our case, we have two actions. One is the final action that you want the persuadee to perform. And second, you have the persuading action, the means that you are using to persuade the persuadee to perform this action. So the communicative action. And these have not been studied at all, and our questions were how do classical argumentation strategies ethically fare with respect to those relying on positive or negative emotions, or even exploiting lies to influence people? Do circumstances affect moral acceptability? What difference is between a human persuader and a machine persuader in the moral acceptability of people? Okay, I skip this. How many of you are familiar with moral dilemmas and the trolley dilemmas? Okay. I think I have to say 2 words about that. So moral dilemmas are when every option at hand leads to breaking some ethical principle. Okay, requiring people to make explicit choices and rank what is more acceptable in the given situation. So the case that was first introduced is the trolley case, trolley experiment. And so the situation is this. This is studies of about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, Thompson. There is a trolley coming down the rail. There is a person at an exchange. It has a lever in front of him, and the trolley ran amok, is going with all his force in the direction that the exchange is oriented to, and there are 5 workers on the rail. So the trolley will kill them. But the person has the lever. If he moves the lever, it will divert the trolley. And on the other rail, there is just one person working. So is it acceptable? Is it morally acceptable that he moves the lever? First case. What would you answer? Okay, in general, most people say yes. Second case, similar, but now there is no exchange, no bifurcation. There is a footbridge. This person is over the footbridge, and in front of him there is a very big man. Ahead on the rail, there are again the 5 workers. And the only thing that he can do is to push the big man down the rail. It's big enough to stop the trolley. So 5 people will be saved, and of course the big man will die. Is it acceptable? Most people in literature have said no. Because, what's the explanation? They say because affect, emotion have a role in the moral assessment of acts. And so it's not just a matter of rules, it's not just a matter of utilitarian balance. It's really, emotion has an important role in that. Then, I don't want to make it too long, there were many other studies that, for instance, the catastrophic case brings forward very, very strongly the utilitaristic view in moral appraisal. So, 3 factors are involved, as said. Now, as I said, in persuasion there are 2 actions under moral scrutiny, and 3 factors play a role in the experiments that we wanted to conduct. The situation, scenario, and we took the classical scenarios, so the bystander case, the one at the lever that I described, the footbridge case, the catastrophic one. The persuader can be in turn a person, the station master, or an intelligent computer-based surveillance system, and the strategy that the persuader uses, argumentative, positive emotion, negative emotions, lie. For instance, in the scenario, in the case of lie, the message is something like this one: push down the large man near to you. There are 5 people working on this track and the trolley is heading for them. If you push the very large man down onto the tracks, his weight will activate an electronic system that will stop instantly the trolley. From this height, it's impossible, he may die, and you'll save the 5 people. So in this case, you influence the target, the persuadee, to push the man with a lie. You tell him a lie, because of course he will die instead, to achieve the goal. And of course, there is a big combination of elements, but to get to the conclusion, we had 2 sets of experiments. One first experiment in Italy with physical people, I mean students. There were, I think, about 100 students that were proposed a series of questionnaires on the basis of the different combination of the scenarios, and then a much larger crowdsourced experiment with US people, on which we did quite some control on the demographics. And anyway, these are the answers. Does the nature of the persuader affect their moral acceptability of persuasion? It appears that not so much. Not so much. I mean, people tend to accept also a machine as a persuader. But people have a strong preconceived negative attitude toward machine-performed persuasion in general. So, in a second experiment, we asked beforehand, what would you think, basically, what would you think of an automatic persuasion system? And as expected, nearly everyone is negative about that. We don't want machines to persuade people. But when confronted with specific questions about is it good that the system sends this message automatically in this situation, persuasive message, yes, they are not affected at all by the consideration that we're speaking about a machine instead of a human. Okay, then of course it is important to consider if there is flexibility in the moral attitude toward different kind of persuasion strategies in a given situation. And we found that indeed there are such differences, and 3 dimensions appear that characterize interpersonal differences concerning moral acceptability of persuasion. So all this is important because in the end we want systems that are able to decide contextually not only on the effectiveness of the strategy adopted, but also, and importantly, on the moral acceptability for the specific people. And for instance, a consequence is also that systems should be capable of deploying their own knowledge about general human attitudes toward ethical statutes of action in context. For instance, in the medical domain, we take into account personality, expertise. I mean, a system could act differently on the moral ground to influence a competent person, a doctor, or a patient. And as I said, to understand how to group somehow, how to cluster the different aspects of the attitude of people in order to have a kind of profiles could be very, very, very helpful. And system reasoning can become quite complex in basing its decision also on these aspects. So, in conclusion, I think that all this constitutes a very, very promising avenue of study. Of course, is somehow complementary to the wealth of understanding that has been developed in various communities, and especially in this recommender system community. In parts, it may even overlap. And what is required is really a strong relation also, as I said, with cognitive studies. Computational creativity is very important. And to go deeply into ethical issues is also something very, very important for the success of this field. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliviero. We still have time for some questions from the audience. We have one in the first row. There are mics coming to you, so
hello, it's Greg Malevich. So in the first part of your talk, you mentioned a system for transforming text to make it more persuasive, and I think you argued that it's automated persuasion system however, the rules are handwritten. So I wonder if you would like to lift this system to be persuasive for other languages than English. It would be useful to understand how you derive these handwritten rules and even what they are.
Okay. No, the rules are not handwritten. There are some high-level rules that are handwritten, but the low-level rules, the ones that really change the text, are corpus-based, so are learned. I mean, there are no explicit rules, but the material is really learned from a corpus, from various corpuses.
Okay, so what are these rules?
What are the high-level rules? The high-level rules are basically at a rhetorical level. So, like, for instance, the example that I gave was the one with the contrast rhetorical relation. So, the restaurant is very good, but a bit pricey. Okay, is transformed into, with the same words, same combination of words, so same low-level rules. In this case, it is transformed into the restaurant is a bit pricey, but what was the wording that I used? But very good. But very good. So the same words that I was using before. So this change is based really on the dynamics of persuasion. We don't have so far, to my knowledge, but in the future perhaps we'll have a large enough and good enough corpus about effectiveness that gives evidence of effectiveness of persuasive rhetorics. What we know, this is our human knowledge, is that if in a contrast you put the thing that you want to highlight in the second position, so the restaurant, the food is very good, put it in the second position because of the emphasis, and if you want also the short-term memory effect, the thing that you say in the end remain more effective. So if you say it's the second thing, but is a bit pricey, you tend to give less importance to the fact that it is good, but you give more importance to the fact that it is pricey. If you exchange those two, you have a better effect because you emphasized, by putting the last position, the concept that you wanted to highlight. Do we have large enough corpora for learning this automatically? At this point, I think not. We'll have in the future.
Other questions from the audience? I have one, because you have presented several approaches to persuasion. One is on this text changes, where you go on adjectives. This is interesting because from text mining you know that the sentiment is in the adjectives, no? So more or less, so you're changing there. And the other one is this grouping, no? So you look at groups. Could you identify some substantial differences, whether this is the group persuasion action is more effective than this on the individual, where you just change words? Could you compare, let's say, because these are different approaches to it? Saying that persuasion is something that I want to change the state of my, let's say, counterpart who is...
Okay. Better? Okay. The group thing is... in a way, it is more complete because we have the complete loop that I indicated in one of the initial slides, in which you assess the state of the group, the system intervenes, and it assesses the results of the intervention. So this is good, but the message that we deliver is on purpose in this case. It's appropriate for the brainstorming situation. Is very, very subtle, simple, doesn't require much cognition. Of course, language instead requires cognition, and sometimes you even want that with one word, you have to reassess many things that you gave for granted in your interpretation beforehand. Often in jokes, this happens, or like in those evocative news titles, automatic production. I mean, you change one word that evokes a whole thing, and perhaps you are led to, if there is irony, for instance, you are led to reason somehow and to reassess the elements that you had beforehand. So it's very different in this case. In jokes, often it happens that you are led to one interpretation of what has been said, and then there is something that triggers a different interpretation, perhaps just with one word, and you have to reinterpret all the material that was there before. And just this cognitive process is part of what gives the pleasure of joke understanding.
We have still time for one more question.
Okay, so thank you for your talk. You had, or most of these examples, you had more or less a linear situation of less or more persuasive sentences or more persuasive text. So in case what you also were talking about is more context sensitive or context aware persuasion in the sense of depending on the situation, depending on the person, you would adapt, and there would be different degrees of being persuasive. So what ways do you see to efficiently generate ground truth in order to assess and being able to identify strategies to find these more or less context sensitive persuasive text?
I think, we did the very, very first initial steps through AdWords, as I said. This is not yet adaptive. It's really based on comparing different kind of messages without knowing about the audience. Now, the idea is to take into account some basic information that could be available, like demographics, for instance, the examples that I made about specialized language is a simple one. To take into account aspects related to the specific individual and the context in which he is. So, for instance, you can know things about the location. Say that you are talking about an application of dynamic advertising. You could build a campaign personalized campaign based on the fact that this person is at home, this person is approaching, say, a shop or a restaurant, this person has gotten to the restaurant. Of course, this flexibility, in principle, seems attractive, but we need methodologies with a fully deployed system later on, and it's early for getting exactly to prove in detail the effectiveness of the approach. Another element that we want to bring in the picture is what's happening, flexibility on the basis of what's happening in the world. So, the example the study the prototype that we developed for the news, the thing could be reversed. Not only providing headlines for the news, but also bringing the news to the advertisement. For instance, of course, we must talk only about positive news, not negative. Nobody would want to have bad news in an advertisement. But say that, Austria just won at football against
Sweden.
Against Sweden.
This is a fact, this is not persuasion.
No, you want to put it automatically, evoke this fact in the advertisement, especially if it is an advertisement targeted to Hannes, that is very sensitive to this success. And so you have a word like, what they say, I think in English they say, if there is one scorer that scored 3 times is a hat trick. Okay, so perhaps you use the word hat trick in advertising. Whatever.
Okay. Thank you, Oliviero.